Get ready for the countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
It's still real to me, damn it.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the July 26, 2012 edition of the Still Real to Us Show, episode number 128. We are in a post-Raw 1000 type of mode here on this week's edition of the Still Real to Us Show. Joining you, as always, I am, of course, Jeff Peck. You can hear me Monday through Friday on 97.9 ESPN or ESPN 1300 in Hartford, Connecticut, and New Haven, Connecticut on The Bauer Show. And joining me, as always, the one and only Redneck Revolution Rise Up, Captain Obvious. Captain, we are in a post-Raw 1000th world. Does the world look any different to you?
I think we're in a 50 Shades of Punk right now kind of scene going on. It's a very confusing time with all the happenings. And it kind of has that like post-WrestleMania feel to it. That's how kind of big the show kind of felt last night.
Yeah, all things considered, WWE was going into booking this show this past Monday Night Raw 1000 as a pay-per-view. It was the first 3-hour edition of Raw. All the legends were due. Undertaker, Rock, Brock Lesnar, Triple H, HBK. They were all going to be in the house, which right off the bat, right there, advertising-wise, it's going to be an action-packed Raw. You know what you're going to get. It had that WrestleMania feel. And what I really loved, Captain, was during the Raw 1000th day, back on July 23rd, many moons ago now, it had that feel on social media as well. You would go on Twitter, you'd go on Facebook, you'd go on Tout, in the case of WrestleChat.net, and it had that WrestleMania feel. And you and I talked about it last week when it comes to excitement for the Raw 1000th episode, and I was pumped for it. I don't know about you, but I think it's safe to say, man, that when we look back at 2012 here, there's only going to be a handful of moments where we're excited to watch a wrestling event, sadly. One being WrestleMania, the other being right now Raw 1000. So with that being said, what were you more excited to see? Were you more excited to watch WrestleMania 28, or were you more excited to watch Raw 1000?
That's a really interesting thought. I hadn't even thought about that yet, but I'm kind of leaning towards Raw 1000 just because the build-up to Raw 1000 had been so good as far as, like, with the former wrestlers, the older guys kind of, popping up here and there and, just wondering who was actually going to show up for Raw 1000. Well, whereas WrestleMania had the build-up for the matches, we only had one match announced for Raw 1000. That was Punk versus John Cena. Everything else was kind of up in the air, so as far as just the anticipation and the wonderment, I would have to go with Raw 1000.
See, I'm going to go on the other side of the coin there. I'm going to go with WrestleMania. It's still the Super Bowl of wrestling, so it still has that aura, that anticipation of what WrestleMania was. And WrestleMania really did have that big feel to it this year with The Rock versus John Cena, Punk and Jericho, etc. From a standpoint where all wrestling fans could tune in and watch, Raw 1000 definitely had that appeal. They're very close in anticipation.
I'll put it this way. To me, WrestleMania was the Super Bowl. Raw 1000 was like the opening of the Avengers, where it had all this hype, but you didn't know how it was going to play out, but you still had that kind of excitement level. And I think that was kind of the draw to me. Like, it's the Super Bowl, you kind of know what you're getting. You know what's going to lay out in front of you. There aren't going to be that many surprises, whereas with Raw 1000, you didn't know what was coming.
Yeah, and in the same sense there, to go off on those analogies, something that I find myself doing lately is comparing The Dark Knight to The Dark Knight Rises, and you could have the same thing there with WrestleMania versus Raw 1000. There's the goods, there's the bad. Obviously, WrestleMania had more wrestling, and Raw 1000 had more entertainment. But on the same par there, a lot of anticipation. There was a lot of, looking forward to Raw 1000. Typically, when it comes to WrestleMania, you know what you're going to get. You really did not know what you were going to get with Raw 1000, especially with all reports circulating that there was going to be a major summer angle being kicked off back at the 1000th episode of Raw. They put it on the same level as Nexus and the CM Punk pipe bomb promo, and we'll get to that later when it comes to where the ending of Raw 1000 fits in that grand scheme of things. But overall, anticipation-wise, Raw 1000 was going to be a huge show. I don't think, Captain, I think it's very safe to say, there's only a handful of Monday Night Raws that are heavily anticipated. Ones that immediately come to mind to me are obviously Raw 1000, the night WWE purchased WCW, the return of Triple H back in 2002, Stone Cold returning back in 2002, I would say The Rock from last year, but that was a surprise. There's only a handful of these moments, and there's been a lot of fantastic moments, but anticipation for a Monday Night Raw where it felt like it was a pay-per-view are few and far between, to be honest, especially it being free television in an era where WWE, for the time being, is a little bit more pay-per-view focused, but the anticipation was certainly there. Now, from our perspective, you and I both have pretty interesting stories about how and where we watched Raw 1000. 2 hours before Raw 1000 was airing, I was teaching CPR for my local fire department that I am a member of, and I'm also a CPR instructor for the American Heart Association. Typically, those classes will go like 4 hours, 6 hours. I was able to get it done in 2 hours, and legitimately, when we were wrapping up, or I was finishing up the paperwork and everybody was gone, I was walking out into what we call the firehouse, the rec room, sitting down, and Raw had begun. So there was a lot of anticipation on my part, and you have a little funny, interesting story as well, how you were watching Raw 1000.
Yeah, I was actually at work, and I was all week long, I've been hoping that I was going to have Monday night off, and then I got my schedule Sunday morning, and there it is. I have to work from 5 until close, and I'm like, oh, great, this is going to be horrible. Bye, honey. Sorry, I had my little Carmen moment there, but I was there looking at the schedule. I'm like, oh, I got to work. This is going to be great. But we have Dish Network now on all of our TVs in the store, so we can kind of flip through. So I actually had warned my coworker. I'm like, hey, Monday night from 8 until close, it's going to be Monday Night Raw in here. And she was not that happy about it, but I outrank her, so I get a little bit more pull. So needless to say, 8 o'clock, I'm able to flip it on. I missed the new intro. I missed the new music package, but I turn it on, and the show's kicking off. And people, as they're coming into the store, are stopping and watching. And it's, I mentioned to you this off the air, it was kind of like just seeing people coming out of the closet as wrestling fans. And I remarked to her, I'm like, the thing is about wrestling, everybody watched it as a kid. Everybody has some kind of connection to it. And that's the great thing about this show is that people can kind of go, oh, man, I remember watching DX with my dad, back in the 90s. Or, I remember watching this in college. And, people were just coming in and stopping and forgetting that they had come in to actually even rent movies.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. There are a lot of closet wrestling fans in this world. One thing I always remember is, the last 2 times we've been fortunate, CM Punk was in studio back in June, and we interviewed him last week for the Bauer Show. And there are people who claim that they don't watch wrestling. Obviously, there's a select few who actually say they watch wrestling. But for those who say that they don't know anything about wrestling, when they hear CM Punk is coming in or CM Punk, we're interviewing him, they know who we're talking about. And there's a lot of those closet wrestling fans out there. So cool to see that those still exist in this great world of ours. Let's kick it right off there. Raw 1000 kicking off with D-Generation X. And one of the questions that you and I asked each other on last week's show was whether or not all of DX was going to open up the show. Raw comes out and fittingly, and Captain, I want to get your thoughts on this, and I don't know if you got to see this, but I actually heard people kind of bashing that Vince McMahon opened up Monday Night Raw instead of D-Generation X as advertised. Granted, he was only there for maybe less than a minute or two, and he was just thanking the fans, one, and two, did his, catchphrase of "Welcome to Monday Night Raw," and let the A and the W just draw out like he did the very first episode.